Hey, good to see you again, and Merry Christmas, by the way. Hope you're having a good one. So look, before we dive into today's topic, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. I know. Everyone says that. But here's the thing. If you don't subscribe, I'm going to assume you're one of those people who puts ketchup on their Christmas turkey. Don't be that person. Subscribe. All right, so here's what we need to talk about. Just yesterday, Trump dropped what might be the biggest Venezuela bombshell since, well, ever. He announced a total and complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers going in and out of Venezuela. Let me say that again because it's huge. A naval blockade, the kind of thing you read about in history books, the kind of thing that under international law is basically considered an act of war. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Jimmy, what's the big deal? Venezuela's been under sanctions for years, but this is different. This isn't just sanctions on paper. This is the U.S. military physically surrounding Venezuela with what Trump called the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America, and he's not exaggerating. We're talking 11 warships, including an aircraft carrier, amphibious assault ships, helicopters, B-22 Ospreys, maritime patrol aircraft, the whole package. But here's where it gets really interesting. Trump didn't just announce a blockade. He also designated Venezuela's government as a foreign terrorist organization, not some cartel, not some rebel group. The actual government. That's massive. Because once you slap that label on something, a whole new world of legal actions opens up. We're talking about making it illegal for anyone, anywhere, to provide material support to the Maduro regime. And get this, Trump claimed that Venezuela stole oil land and other assets from the United States. Now, I've looked into this, and honestly, I have no idea what he's talking about. Venezuela didn't exactly sail over and take Texas oil fields, but facts aside, the message is clear. Trump wants Maduro out, and he wants Venezuela's oil. He's not even being subtle about it anymore. So the question everyone's asking is, could this actually be the end of Maduro's economy? Because here's the thing. Venezuela's entire financial lifeline runs through oil. We're talking about 80 to 90% of their exports. If Trump can actually enforce this blockade, if he can stop those tankers from moving, Maduro's regime doesn't just take a hit, it potentially collapses. Now, I'm going to walk you through exactly what's happening, what this means for Venezuela, what it means for the region, and yeah, what it means for us, because this isn't just some foreign policy drama happening thousands of miles away. This has real consequences. So stick with me. All right, let's get into what's actually happening on the ground. About a week before this blockade announcement, U.S. forces seized an oil tanker called the Skipper off the coast of Venezuela. Picture this: helicopters descending, special forces boarding the ship, the whole action movie scene. This wasn't some fishing boat. The Skipper is a super tanker that can carry around 2 million barrels of oil. That's a lot of crude. Venezuela immediately called it piracy. Maduro's government went to the UN, filed complaints, the whole diplomatic routine. They're saying the U.S. is stealing their assets, violating international law, all of that. And you know what? Under traditional international law, they might have a point. Blockades are serious business. There's actually a Justice Department memo from 1961 during the Cuba crisis that says blockades are belligerent acts that are only justified if a state of war exists. But Trump's not exactly known for following traditional diplomatic playbooks, right? In his announcement on Truth Social, he laid it all out. Venezuela is completely surrounded. The armada will only get bigger, and then he added this demand that Venezuela return oil land and other assets that they supposedly stole from America. Again, nobody can quite figure out what assets he's talking about, but the implication is clear. Hand over your resources, or we tighten the noose. Now, here's what makes this economically devastating for Venezuela right now. There are about 18 tankers loaded with Venezuelan oil sitting in their waters. These aren't small vessels. Some of them are classified as very large cargo container ships holding millions of barrels. If those ships can't move, if buyers won't risk purchasing that oil because of the terrorist organization designation, Venezuela's revenue stream basically dries up overnight. And before we go further, quick pause. If you're finding this information valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel reach more people. All right, back to it. So Venezuela's economy is already in rough shape. We're talking about a country that once had the highest GDP in South America, one of the wealthiest nations in the region. Today, total collapse. Their economy has shrunk by 80% in less than a decade. 80%. That's the fifth largest economic collapse in modern history. Hyperinflation, food shortages, medicine shortages, millions of people fleeing the country. Oil makes up over half of Venezuela's government revenue. Some estimates put it even higher. So when Trump goes after the oil, he's not just attacking an export product. He's attacking the regime's ability to pay the military, pay government workers, maintain any semblance of control. China has been buying most of Venezuela's oil, usually at a discount because of the sanctions risk. About 80% goes to China, 17% to the U.S. through Chevron's special license, and the rest scattered elsewhere. But now with this terrorist designation and blockade threat, even Chinese buyers are going to think twice. Nobody wants to be caught providing material support to a designated terrorist organization. The legal and financial risks are just too high. So let's talk about the reactions, because they've been all over the map. Venezuela's response was immediate and furious. Their government released a statement calling Trump's announcement grotesque, reckless, a serious threat. They're saying Trump acts like Venezuela's oil and land are his personal property, that he's trying to steal their wealth. They're planning to denounce this at the United Nations, file complaints the whole international law route. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez went on Telegram saying Venezuela condemns the military threat and will defend its rights to free trade and sovereignty. Maduro himself said the world will rise up against piracy and oil plunder. Strong words. But here's the reality. What can they actually do about it? The U.S. has 11 warships parked off their coast. That's not a metaphor. That's real military hardware. Now, it's not just Venezuela pushing back. Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro from Texas called the blockade unquestionably an act of war, a war that Congress never authorized and the American people don't want. He's pushing a resolution to direct Trump to end hostilities with Venezuela. Whether that goes anywhere is another question entirely, but it shows there's domestic political opposition to this approach. Russia's foreign ministry chimed in too, saying tensions around Venezuela could have unpredictable consequences for the entire West. That's diplomatic. Speak for this could spiral into something bigger, because Venezuela has support from Russia, China, Cuba, Iran, Turkey. These aren't countries that are just going to sit back and watch the U.S. steamroll one of their allies. China especially is paying close attention. They've invested heavily in Venezuela over the years, and they're the primary buyer of Venezuelan oil. If this blockade actually stops the flow of oil to China, you're looking at potential confrontation between major powers. That's not something to take lightly. From a legal standpoint, international lawyers are having a field day with this. Some argue that a blockade without a formal declaration of war is illegal under international law. Others say the U.S. is within its rights to enforce its own sanctions. The truth is, international law gets fuzzy when you have military power backing up your decisions. Here's where, I'll be honest with you, part of me looks at this and thinks, yeah, Maduro's regime is corrupt, authoritarian, terrible for the Venezuelan people. But another part of me looks at Trump's approach and thinks, is this really the solution? A military blockade, seizing ships, threatening to bomb land targets? It feels less like carefully calibrated foreign policy and more like, well, Trump being Trump. And let's not forget what Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, said in an interview with Vanity Fair. She said, Trump wants to keep blowing boats up until Maduro cries, "Uncle." That's the actual quote. Blowing boats up. The administration has already conducted deadly military strikes on boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. At least 95 people have been killed in these operations. They call them narco-terrorists, but still we're talking about lethal force on a pretty significant scale. Let's dig into the details and the backstory here, because this didn't come out of nowhere. Venezuela's been on a downward economic spiral for years. Back in 1998, under Hugo Chavez, oil production peaked at around 3.4 million barrels a day. By the time Chavez died and Maduro took over in 2013, it was down to 2.7 million. Today, about 700,000 to 900,000 barrels a day, depending on who you ask. What happened? A combination of chronic underinvestment, political mismanagement, corruption, and then us sanctions that started ramping up in 2017 and really hit hard in 2019. The first Trump administration essentially blocked all Venezuelan crude exports to the United States. Biden granted Chevron a special license in 2022, partly to try to lower gas prices, but the scope was limited. Chevron could operate, but revenues couldn't go directly to the Maduro government. Then Trump came back into office this year and immediately revoked that license before reinstating it with even tighter conditions. He also imposed a 25% tariff on any country that imports Venezuelan oil. That was aimed at China, India, Russia, countries that had been buying Venezuelan crude despite sanctions. India's Reliance Industries actually stopped buying. China didn't. Now, the terrorist organization designation adds a whole new layer. It's not just about sanctions anymore. It's about making it illegal for anyone to do business with Venezuela's government. Banks, insurance companies, shipping firms, they all have to worry about criminal liability for material support of terrorism. That's a powerful legal tool. There are currently about 712 vessels worldwide on the sanctions list. According to shipping tracking firms, nearly 40 are in Venezuelan waters right now. The skipper that was seized was carrying about 1.8 million barrels. Multiply that by the other sanctioned tankers sitting there, and you're looking at maybe 11 million barrels of oil that can't move without risking U.S. intervention. Here's the economic reality for Venezuela. Oil makes up about 20% of their GDP. Government revenue, over 50% from oil. When you cut off that revenue, the government can't function. They can't pay the military, can't pay government workers, can't maintain infrastructure. The military's loyalty is bought with money and privileges. Cut the money, and suddenly Maduro's grip on power gets a lot shakier. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this deep dive, hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. Now, Trump keeps talking about Venezuela financing drug terrorism with oil money. Is there truth to that? Partially. There's a group called the Cartel de los Soles, named after the suns on their epaulets. Basically, corrupt police and military officials involved in drug smuggling. They work with Colombian cartels to move cocaine through Venezuelan territory. But estimates put this at maybe 10% of Colombian cocaine traffic. It's real, but it's not like the entire Venezuelan government is just one big drug cartel. What's really driving this, in my opinion, is oil. Trump wants access to Venezuela's oil reserves. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, 300 billion barrels. That's more than Saudi Arabia, more than anyone in Trump's view. If Maduro's gone, American companies could potentially get back in there. Houston-based Chevron is already drilling, but under strict limitations. In the 70s, Venezuela nationalized its oil sector, kicking out American firms. Trump sees an opportunity to reverse that. So what does all this mean going forward? What are the actual consequences here? Let's start with the most immediate impact. Venezuela's economy is about to get hit harder than it's ever been hit. If this blockade is actually enforced, if those tankers can't move, Venezuela's already struggling economy could completely collapse. We're talking about a country where 82% of people already live in poverty, more than half in extreme poverty, unable to afford basic food. When the government loses its main revenue source, a few things happen. First, the military starts getting nervous. They're not loyal to Maduro out of love. They're loyal because they get paid, they get privileges, they get power, cut their funding, and suddenly coup talk starts. Second, the general population, which is already suffering, suffers even more. Food becomes scarcer, medicine disappears, inflation, which was already projected at 180% for this year, could spike again. Third, and this is important, migration increases. Over 7 million Venezuelans have already fled the country. That's the largest exodus in Latin American history. If the economy collapses further, we could see millions more trying to leave. Where do they go? Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and yes, eventually many try to reach the United States. So Trump's actions here could actually create a bigger migration crisis. Geopolitically, this is where things get really interesting. China's not going to be happy about losing access to cheap Venezuelan oil. Russia, Iran, Cuba, they're all invested in keeping Maduro in power. If the U.S. pushes too hard, you could see these countries responding in ways that escalate tensions globally. Maybe not direct military confrontation, but proxy conflicts, increased support for anti-American movements in the region, cyber attacks, economic retaliation. There's also the question of international law and precedent. If the U.S. can unilaterally declare a blockade, seize ships without a formal declaration of war, what's to stop other countries from doing the same? China around Taiwan, Russia in the Black Sea. It sets a precedent that could undermine the rules-based international order that, ironically, the U.S. helped create. Now, let's be real for a second. Could this actually work? Could Trump force Maduro out through economic strangulation? Maybe Maduro's hold on power is dependent on money. Cut the money and his support base crumbles. But it's also possible this just prolongs the suffering of ordinary Venezuelans. While Maduro digs in, plays the anti-imperialist card, and rallies nationalist sentiment against the U.S. Some analysts think Maduro might offer concessions, maybe a gradual exit plan, power sharing with the opposition, something to ease the pressure, but Trump's White House has already rejected preliminary offers like that. They want Maduro gone, period. No half measures. So where does this leave us? We're watching a high-stakes game of chicken. Trump's betting that economic pressure and military intimidation will break Maduro. Maduro's betting that he can survive long enough for Trump to lose interest or face domestic political backlash. The Venezuelan people are caught in the middle. Here's my take. I don't think anyone wins here. Maduro's regime is terrible for Venezuela, no question. But a military blockade strikes on boats' potential land operations. That's not liberating Venezuela. That's potentially creating a failed state, a humanitarian catastrophe, and a migration crisis that affects the entire hemisphere. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. But hey, that's just my read on it. I'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below. And if you made it this far, you're clearly interested in this stuff. So do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's happening, because this story is just getting started, and I'll be here covering every twist and turn. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.